It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna, back in New York, back in the Rico Brogna studios of my home. Welcome into episode number 443 of Rico Brogna. It was certainly fun getting down to spring training and seeing some baseball. But I'll tell you this about going to spring training, right? It is very cool. It's nice to get out of the cold weather of New York. But after you watch a few innings, that's all it takes, just a few innings of spring training baseball, and you hear the crack of the bat, which is very, very cool, and you hear the warm-up music as the team is getting ready to play a game. After you watch a couple of innings of that, you're ready for the real stuff. Joe B has always been right, even though it took me a long time to appreciate it, because I think when you're younger, you're more naive about things. But Joe B was always right when he called preseason football, and I will even say it about spring training baseball, non-alcoholic beer. Like, you get the baseball, you get the football, but then you realize it's not the real stuff. With that said, it was cool being down there. It was cool talking to a few Mets, including Pete Alonso. Now, on Mondays, Evan and Tiki, I played a short clip of my discussion with Pete because it was beard related, the hijinks of a beard. But we talked about a few other things on the field in spring training, and we'll give you the full interview with Pete Alonso coming up in just a few minutes. But a couple of things I do want to hit on, one of which is sort of related to Pete Alonso, and that is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I know he is the obsession of a lot of Met fans, the obsession of a lot of baseball fans, because he's going to be a free agent at the end of next season. There were new details that emerged over the last couple of days from the New York Post, John Heyman, and also from Ken Rosenthal, concerning what Vlad was asking for and what he was offered in his negotiations with the Toronto Blue Jays. So apparently the Blue Jays offered him a heavily deferred $500 million contract, which got the present day value to between about $420 and $440. They were also offering him a 14-year contract. Okay. That is, I'm telling you right now, and I guess we'll fight about it during the offseason of the Rico Brogna. That is crazy. I don't give a crap how young he is, and I know he's young, and don't give me the Soto comparisons because he's not Juan Soto. He's just not. I don't think he'll age the way Juan Soto ages. The idea of giving Vladimir Guerrero Jr. a 14-year contract for $500 million is insanity. And I understand I like Pete Alonso, and I bring this up because we're going to play the one-on-one interview with Pete, and I grew my beard out for Pete, and all the laughs, and he's a homegrown Met, and blah, blah, blah. I am not suggesting to you right now, nor would I ever, that Pete Alonso is better than Vladimir Guerrero Jr. That'd be a lie. Not saying it. I'm not saying that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. versus Pete Alonso over the next 5 years would be Pete winning or even be that close, though I think it could be close. But what I'm suggesting is if you give a rat's ass about value, like if this just isn't blind check baseball, where, who cares? It's not my money. If you actually look at value, there is no way anyone could think that Vladimir Guerrero Jr., as talented as he is, would be worth it on a 14-year freaking contract versus potentially bringing Pete back on, let's say, a 4-year contract. And I had this argument briefly with Tiki on the air because Tiki kept saying, look at the age, look at the age, look at the age. Okay, I get it. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is younger than Pete Alonso by about 5 years. Okay? That's not a difference in 5 years on contract. Vlad's looking for 14. Pete would be lucky to get 5. That's not a 5-year difference. That's a 9-year difference, if my math is correct. So as I read this report about Guerrero Jr., it just reaffirms my belief that, look, when you get to free agency, you talk to anybody, but I would not be in that ballpark. I would not. And I'll also tell you there's a lot of pressure on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to go out and have a monster season because 2 years ago, Pete Alonso had a better statistical year than Guerrero. So what's Vlad going to do this season? First of all, who knows? I mean, the Blue Jays actually may be pretty good. We're going to do an MLB prediction, Rico Brogna, in a couple of weeks right before the start of the season. We do Met predictions, but we're also going to do like general MLB predictions. So I'm going through the rosters, reminding myself, checking out some stats, doing my research, and my kind of walk away from reading more about Vlad and reading more about the Blue Jays is that I think the Blue Jays are going to be pretty good. So I don't think they're going to trade him at the trade deadline, but I also just wouldn't go into the waters of a 15-year, $500 million contract. I think that's crazy. So I thought that was an interesting piece of information that came out via the New York Post.
But here's my question to you, right? So I understand that you're saying it's just a crazy contract. Vladimir Guerrero, is he really that good? All that stuff. The one thing that we've noticed is the Blue Jays want to give away their money. They want someone to stay. They want someone to be the face of the franchise. Same way they want Soto is the face of the franchise for the Mets. Aaron Judge, face of the franchise for the Yankees. There's a $50 million gap between the two, from what I understood, which averages out to $3.5 million. Why wouldn't the Blue Jays just pay that if they're going to pay or going to offer $500 million anyway?
It's a great question. Like, they offered a heavily deferred contract. So why not, if you're Rodgers and you're the Toronto Blue Jays, do you not just say, you know what, let's get this thing done? I think a part of it is, and it could be kind of what I'm saying in the back of my mind, which is, you know what, kid, go to free agency at the end of the year. I think clearly Vlad has a level of interest in staying, but once you get to free agency, anything can happen. And maybe the Blue Jays think, well, I'll bid everybody. Like, if the market dictates, kind of similar to Pete in a way, if the market dictates that we got to go to 550 or higher than we even offered, maybe we'll do it. But we don't think the market's going to dictate that. And I got to tell you right now, and I made this long-term prediction with Tiki on the radio about this, I don't think he's getting $500 million in free agency. Like, I'm not super confident he's going to have a monster season. I think he could have a good year. I think he may have a decent season. I don't know if he's putting together a 950 OPS kind of season. I don't know. So number one, I'm not betting on the fact that he's going to have a great, great season. And number two, I just wonder, are the Dodgers bidding on Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? The answer is probably not. Are the Yankees bidding on Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? I would tell you the answer is probably not. As much as my fellow Met fans don't want to hear this, are the Mets bidding on Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? I'm sorry, guys. I don't think they are. Not on that level. I don't. And hold me to it. So if we're eliminating the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Mets, I think the Red Sox are bidding. Okay, I'll put them in there. How much of a I guess a bidding war are we going to see if you at least agree or take my view at face value that the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Mets aren't going to be involved? So I just don't think he's going to get that. So to answer your question, long-winded wise, on why the Blue Jays just didn't go the extra mile, is they probably look at it and say, we'll do it in free agency. We don't think the market's going to dictate him getting much more than what he's asking for.
So you're saying that there's, you can only have so many $500 million contracts on a payroll, is what you're saying.
I am. And I'm telling my fellow Met fans, I do not think Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to be a New York Met. And it's not because my opinion is I wouldn't pay him. I just don't think he's going to get there. And I think that David Stearns is very much about value. Before we get to Pete Alonso, I had more of a thought to this Alvarez injury. Obviously, we were there. What an experience that was Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning in the dugout in Port St. Lucie, Florida, when Mendy walks by, says, hey, guys, I'll talk to you in a minute. That's what he says. Sits down, SNY camera goes in front of him, and he announces Francisco Alvarez has the broken hamate bone in his left hand. So we spent a little bit of time on the last Rico going through guys not on the roster that could, or mostly guys on the roster that may replace Alvarez's spot. The guys are already here, guys like Hayden Singer, Chris Williams, guys like that. I did make a list of non-roster guys on different teams that the Mets could target. But before I get there, I'll tell you this. With Alvarez not in the lineup and Luis Torrens being an everyday catcher, which he should be, and I think defensively, we saw it last year, he's an A-plus defender. He shuts down a running game. I think he's good with the pitching staff. I don't think there's any question. I don't think there's any debate. Luis Torrens is the everyday catcher. But thinking about Torrens every day, thinking about the fact that Alvarez is not in this lineup for a month and a half, to me only furthers my belief that Brett Baty needs to be on this roster. Now, I have leaned towards Baty for a while now, so it's not a new opinion for me to say the 26th man on the roster should be Brett Baty. I don't think the Mets need a backup shortstop. I think that's been made very clear by Carlos Mendoza and even made clear by Francisco Lindor. And we'll get to that a little bit later on in this pod. So they don't need a backup shortstop. So what do they need out of the 26th man on the roster? My argument, even before Alvarez got hurt, is a guy that can hit, a guy that can play, a guy that can play when you sit Jeff McNeil, or when Jeff McNeil plays left field, or a guy who can DH, whether it's sitting Jesse Winker and Starling Marte, or it's just a guy I'm going to give consistent at-bats to. I need to see what Brett Baty is. This is the last chance, I think, for us to see what Brett Baty is. Now, what does this have to do with Francisco Alvarez? Here's what it does. If you looked at the Met lineup, you look at it right now. I want everybody to think about the Met lineup, okay? The regulars that will be there. Lindor, Soto, Alonso, Vientos, Winker, or Marte, Nimmo, McNeil. Think about everybody. Who was ever a candidate to be pinch hit for? Think about that. Who in this everyday lineup, your regular everyday lineup, would be a candidate to be pinch hit for? I think your answer would be maybe center field. Maybe. Okay, let's see what Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri do early in the season. Maybe center field. And I would say that DH, between the two of them, Marte and Winker, maybe that spot. Like Winker is starting, a tough lefty's on the mound, you go to Starling Marte. So I would say those were the two spots that you would look at and say, hey, I may pinch hit. Well, now we have a third, and that is the catcher spot. I'm not sure what Luis Torrens is going to do offensively, because if you recall, last year when Torrens first came up here, he did hit, and then he cooled off. And so the jury is kind of out on what Luis Torrens is going to be as an everyday offensive player. So a little perspective, here are his final numbers last year with the Mets in the 47 games, 130 plate appearances that he had. And by the way, that number, 47 games, 130 plate appearances, that's probably what he's going to have to play with Alvarez out. Because whoever the backup catcher is, what are we talking about? Once a week? Your normal day game after night game? Like, Torrens is going to play an awful lot. His final numbers were 229, 292 on base, 665 OPS. He hit 3 home runs and 15 RBIs. By the way, it felt like it was a lot more than that, because he was very clutch and productive early on when Luis Torrens was called up. In fact, if you look at his numbers, listen to this. In June, when Torrens was called up, he was 9 for 29. That's a 310 average. He had all 3 of his home runs in June in the first 8 games he started, and he had an OPS of 1,030. Small sample size, but when Torrens first came up in June, pretty damn good. In the month of July, he made 11 starts, 44 plate appearances, hit an even 300, 341 on base, 766 OPS, no home runs, 8 RBIs. Not quite the power, not quite the production, but still not bad. So in June and July, over the course of the first 19 games he started, you're talking about an above 300 batting average and an OPS that's in the 800s. In August, he was 3 for 27. That's a 111 batting average, and he had 0 extra base hits. In September, he was 3 for 22. That's a 136 batting average. He had 2 doubles, 2 extra base hits. So you see that when Torrens first was added to this roster, he was really productive. And then in August and September, as a part-time backup player, he gave you nothing offensively. I am going to take the leap of faith, or at least the hope, that he'll be in the middle, or maybe what his overall numbers told you, which is a 225 batting average, a 680 OPS, but damn it, he will give you defense. Well, if that's the case, he's a pinch hit candidate every freaking night. So if he's a pinch hit candidate every single night, I think that makes Taylor and Siri less likely to be pinch hit for. But the catcher spot to almost be treated like the pitcher spot late in the game, especially if you're trailing. Okay. Who do you want coming off the bench? Do you guys want Luis Angel Acuna to be that guy? Do you want Donovan Walton to be that guy? Who do you want that guy to be? I think it's clear, even if you're not a believer in Brett Baty, that Brett Baty would be that guy. He has now become a left-handed bat off the bench for Luis Torrens, who we cannot predict what he's going to give you offensively. So one of the major fallouts, in my humble opinion, on this injury to Alvarez, besides us bitching and complaining and whining at the world, is Brett Baty should be a mortal lock to make this team. Hoff, you've been on the fence about Baty, but when you think about it now, knowing you are going to pinch hit for Torrens almost on a nightly basis if you're trailing in a game, don't you want Brett Baty coming up with a couple of guys on base against a right-handed reliever in that opportunity?
I mean, on top of the fact that he's had a great spring, I know that doesn't mean anything at all, spring training numbers or whatever. I have to say, he's deserved that spot. He does. The only other person I would say, and I know it doesn't make Joey Meneses. He's not a left-handed bat, no doubt, but he seems to have ability, power. I'd like to see him maybe on the bench, maybe, but it's probably Brett Baty.
By the way, Joey Meneses is not a terrible name to mention only because we are thinking along the same lines that last guy needs to give you offense because you are going to be aggressive. I think, at least I would, if I'm Carlos Mendoza. So I'm giving you my opinion on pinch hitting for Torrens late in games that you're trailing. Obviously, when you're ahead in the game and Torrens gives you the defense he gives you, you're up in a game. Unless you think it's a golden opportunity to break a game open, you're going to let him play. But I think that the pinch hit role, which is so different without the pitcher hitting, looks a little bit different. So I don't think Meneses is the worst name to bring up because we've seen what he can do at the major league level. But Baty gives you so much more versatility. Problem with Joey Meneses is where does he play? Brett Baty can play second base. He's learning. He can play third base, which moves Vientos either to DH or first base. There's a value to that, especially because of McNeil. Baty playing second base opens up McNeil to playing left field, especially on the days Brandon Nimmo doesn't play, which it's going to happen. Mendy basically confirmed that to us. Like, there are going to be more days than ever before where Brandon Nimmo is going to have to get an off day in your attempt to keep him healthy.
Yeah, no, Joey Meneses is literally just a bat. That's all he is. And then you have to figure out who to replace him after that.
We are biased because we saw Joey Meneses hit a home run in spring training.
We saw a lot of home runs, didn't we? I
did.
think we saw a bunch.
We saw Mark Vientos hit a home run. We saw Juan Soto not hit a home run, but hit the crap out of the ball.
We saw some good offense. Who was the backup catcher? Who was the catcher that hit the...
Yeah, we saw, oh my God, Jackson Reitz hit a grand slam home run. And that leads us to say Jackson Reitz should be the backup catcher. Damn it, we saw him in a grand slam. But one of the coolest things we did down there, had a nice conversation with the manager of the team. We aired Mark Vientos, talking to Mark Vientos. That was on the Sunday Rico Brogna, if you want to check that out. We talked to Darryl Strawberry on the Sunday Rico Brogna, but we also talked to Pete Alonso. So, ladies and gentlemen, we take you back to Sunday late morning, a hot day in Port St. Lucie, Florida, where Pete Alonso had a nice chat with me.
Pete, how much credit do you give my beard for your new contract?
Actually, 100% all the credit. I appreciate you. Thank you. I'm really happy you did end up shaving.
Yes.
I'm sure people in your family were happy too.
My wife was thrilled. I shaved for two reasons in the middle of the season. Number one, my wife said she would leave me. And number two, I saw you went clean shaven during like the team struggles, and I took it as you speaking to me through the TV to say, Evan, you can now shave. Is that accurate?
That's exactly what I was doing.
Okay,
that's 100%. That's exactly what I was
I
doing.
was very nervous this offseason, I'm not going to lie to you. Was there ever a moment you woke up and said, I'm not going to be a Met next season?
No. I mean, there's definitely thought because, I mean, obviously, like, we had to wait a long time. But, I mean, yeah, I mean, I was pretty steadfast the whole time. I mean, my family and I were really steadfast the whole offseason, knowing that the right thing would happen, and it did.
Toronto. Terrible place to live, right?
I mean, my buddy Chris Bassett says it's pretty nice, and also there's this unbelievable place next by. I think it's Sunnyvale. Yeah, Sunnyvale's pretty cool.
I don't talk too nicely about Toronto. I was just kidding. Did you get, like, were people on this team trying to bring you back? Was there, like, recruiting? Because I don't know how this works with baseball players. Were they letting it be? It's business. You're on your own. Like, how did that process go with your teammates during the offseason?
I mean, I just getting calls and texts from a bunch of people, and I mean, Jeff, Nimmo, Wink. I mean, obviously Francisco. I mean, I was in contact with Mendy. And obviously there was a lot of dialogue between my agent and Steve and David. So there's a ton of people that were saying like, hey, we want you back, we need you back. Obviously me working out with Sean and Ryan Stanek and other. I mean, those are just to name a few. That's like half our roster. But it's nice to be appreciated from guys and people within the organization. So I mean, I'm really happy to have that respect from my teammates.
Let's go to this Milwaukee at bat, because I get tingles thinking about this. What is going through your mind? It had been a rough game. You had the drop pop up like 2 innings before. What is going through your mind as you step up to the plate? Guys on base, Devin Williams. We know the situation. Give us your mindset as you're coming up into what I think is like the greatest at bat in the history of the franchise.
Oh, thank you. It was just one pitch, one spot, and he threw it there. And I'm just fortunate enough to put the bat on the ball, hit it on the sweet spot, and then as soon as the ball touched the bat, I knew it.
Was he tipping his pitches? Did you have an idea of what was coming there?
No. I mean, for me, I think it was just looking – I was just sold out on one spot and one location the entire inning. If you watch the entire inning, our entire team approach is the same. It's like you want the ball – for righties, you want the ball that starts a little away from you, and then for lefties is get the ball in and let it leak back over the plate, whether it's his fastball or his changeup. So I credit just the entire team approach. I mean, Francisco had a phenomenal at bat. Yep. Nimmo with a 2-strike hit, and then realistic. I mean, Jesse hanging in there, having a great at bat, and then Starling getting that hit the other way to get that extra run of insurance. So it was just an unbelievable inning.
That was an incredible moment. And what's funny is when that ball left your bat, at least at home, I thought fly ball to right field. I wasn't sure. You seemed to know immediately. Like your reaction was, that's gone.
Yeah. Again, the sweet spot made contact with the ball, and as soon as the ball hit the bat, I knew it.
Did that relax you? Because obviously you end up having a great postseason against the Phillies, the Dodgers. You hit that home run in Game 5. Was that almost like this relaxing moment for you?
I mean, the postseason is anything but relaxing. I mean, it's definitely the most high stress baseball I've ever played in my life, but also it's the most fun. So with that stress, there's high risk, high reward, and I mean, honestly, that's just a great moment to be. That was my favorite. I mean, this past postseason was the best baseball moments I've ever had in my life, so it was really special.
That home run, I think, and you had a few of them, the one against the Phillies, obviously, too, but I think that is one of the great home runs in the history of the franchise. Has it sunk in yet on where that ranks kind of in your life of hitting many, many home runs?
I mean, I think it was definitely my favorite baseball moment. I think my favorite homer, I think it was the three-run homer at home against the Dodgers in Game 5, because it's packed house, win or go home, and I mean that. I think for me, like hitting that ball to straightaway center, I mean that was probably one of my best swings, my favorite homer, but my favorite baseball moment was the swing in Milwaukee.
So I had a lineup idea that I brought to Mendy. He already turned it down, so it's dead. But I'm curious because it involves you. I've always wanted to see you with great protection. I feel like at times over the last 5 years you haven't had it. I was thinking Pete 2, Soto 3. Now, that's not going to happen, and Mendy said no. But what do you think of that? Is that like an idea where you'd be like, it's not bad. I like that.
For years I've been trying to hit leadoff, but no, everyone's told me no. I'm just messing around. But I mean, it's honestly wherever Mendy sees to write the best lineup and put the best lineup and alignment forward. That's obviously what I'm fired up to do. But I mean, whether it's hitting 3, 2, 4, or 5, I mean, honestly, I've hit in the middle of the order my entire career. So whatever happens, wherever I'm written in the lineup, I know I'm going to be right in the thick of the order. So just going to put best at bats I can forward.
Are you thinking about the Met home run record? Because you should do it this year. Is that going to be something you're already thinking about?
I mean, I've definitely thought about it, and for me, I just want to capitalize on pitches over the plate. That's what it's all about.
Now, I still want you as a Met for life. I assume you still want to be a Met for life, correct?
Yeah, well, you should. I mean, again, you should grow your beard out again and
That's
see what
what I'm
happens.
asking.
Yeah, grow your beard out again. See
So
what
you
happens.
need another beard to get this going?
Yeah, for sure.
When should I start it? Can I wait or do I have to do it right now?
I think you should shave opening day or like right before opening day. Have like a fresh, clean slate, and then go from there.
Done. I'll do it for you.
I appreciate
Only for you. Bro.
as a bargaining. You should do that as a bargaining tactic.
You got it.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, Pete.
Yeah.
As a bargaining tactic. Now, I haven't fully decided if I'm going to go through with this, but since Pete requested it, he brought it up after I said you still want to be a Met for life. I'll have to strongly consider it. But one thing I noticed about Pete, because I spoke to him last year, a part of it was recorded last year, he does seem much more relaxed. And it's not that he was ever a non-relaxed guy when I've conversed with him, but this time, even more than last year, he seemed more jovial, more relaxed. And I don't know what it is. I mean, is it $30 million this season? I don't know. Is it the success that the team had and certainly he had in the postseason? Maybe it is. I have no idea. But he definitely felt like a more relaxed Pete Alonso, and I'm certainly not the only one that thought that. So hopefully he has a big year, and hopefully next year we're talking about, him coming back for more. That is certainly the hope. But very good to see Pete Alonso. I guess this is now a tradition. My yearly spring training discussion with Pete concerning beards. Now, as far as the rest of the team is concerned, I love the fact that AJ Minter actually threw in a spring training game. I mean, that is a huge step in the right direction because we're starting to get to that point now here in the middle of March where we're 2 weeks away from opening day. Let that sink in. We are 2 weeks away from opening day. We are past the halfway point of spring training. So the days are dwindling. If you're a starting pitcher, you've got one or maybe two starts left before the season begins. So when there are guys who haven't gotten into games, this is the week, in my opinion, the week of March 10th that began 2 days ago where, all right, can you get into a game? Because if you're not getting into a game, I'm going to assume you're not ready for the start of the season. And this week, the Mets have had two guys who have been hurt/recovering, who I expect to be on the roster, but until they get into a game, you have it in the back of your mind, maybe they won't. And AJ Minter was certainly one of them. AJ Minter had an appearance on Wednesday afternoon. He pitched a good inning, had a few swing and misses. His fastball got to 93. Minter was asked after the game, are you good with that? And he's like, yeah, okay, not really. So he expects the velocity to tick up a little bit more. He also said, I thought this was interesting, because he was asked point blank, hey, how many appearances do you need to make before you feel comfortable going into the start of the season? And AJ Minter said, if I include bullpens, so this is not strictly just getting into a game, he's including bullpens, he said about 9 or 10. Now, he's also said he's had about 2 or 3 bullpens, and of course, this was his first appearance in a real game, and he ended up throwing 1 scoreless inning, got a strikeout, nice clean inning for AJ Minter. He ended up throwing 10 pitches, so it was nice and easy. It was a very good return. So that would basically be his third or fourth. He says he needs to get to 10. He's going to not pitch for 2 more days. He'll get into the game on Saturday, and that gets him halfway home. So barring any kind of setback, barring any kind of injury, obviously, it does feel like AJ Minter getting into this game, already having a few bullpens, it feels like he's trending in the right direction to be ready and be on the opening day roster. So that's guy number 1 who I thought it was important to see out there. Guy number 2 is Starling Marte. And I am probably higher on Starling Marte than most these days, where I feel this role for him of being a part-time player and being a designated hitter who rarely will see the field. The more I think about it, the more I wouldn't put him out in the field very often. He's an option, but I would almost treat it the way Giancarlo was a few years ago, where if I have to, fine. I prefer not to. And the Mets have a lot of options. Jesse Winker can play the outfield. Jeff McNeil can play the outfield. So that gives you that extra kind of wiggle room to have an extra outfielder from your everyday second baseman who can shift out there and create more opportunities for Brett Beatty or maybe down the road Luis Angel Acuna. But Starling Marte finally got into a game on Monday, and I was very excited. He was facing Sonny Gray. The game was on TV, and while I am so done with spring training and sick of spring training, I was curious. That was the at-bat in that game where I'm like, all right, let me see what you got. And the very first pitch, Starling Marte rips a double into the left field corner. And I'm like, yes, off of Sonny Gray too, might I add. He then played on Wednesday, and Starling Marte went 1 for 3 with a couple of strikeouts. It is not about the performance, though it's nice to see that Marte has 2 hits in his first 2 games. It's about getting out there, playing in games, looking relatively healthy. And I'm telling you right now, if you're asking a baseball player to just hit, you're not asking him to run around and play right field, which, by the way, he was awful at last year. Starling Marte's defense stunk last year. This is tailor-made for him to be a productive player as a part-time player. I am still hoping that David Stearns doesn't trade him. I said it on a recent Rico. I'm starting to get nervous about this. I'm starting to think that they are going to try to dump him off. I'm not a fan of it. I get he's overpaid. I get he's making a lot of money. This is the role where he can have success. So we see Starling Marte get into a couple of games. A great sign that he'll be ready to be on the opening day roster and have that role as the right-handed DH platoon along with Jesse Winker. And maybe get more at-bats than that because, like I mentioned, Brandon Nimmo is going to sit. I hope he's ready for the start of the season. The Mets keep downplaying this. Not a big deal. Don't worry. Okay, fine. I believe you. But even if he's ready, he's going to sit once, twice a week potentially. It not only opens up an opportunity for Brett Beatty, like I mentioned earlier, but it could open up an opportunity for Marte to get at-bats even against right-handed starters. So good sign seeing Starling Marte out there. The third guy, who we still have not seen yet, is Dednell Nunez, but he did throw a bullpen session. So that is, or he's going to throw a bullpen session. I forget if he's thrown it or he's throwing it again. Either way, we need to see him in a game. And so the way I kind of look at the Nunez situation is I get they're slow playing it, and I get why they're slow playing it, but he's going to have to get into a game or two to think he's going to make the opening day roster. And again, we're 2 weeks away. So bullpen sessions are nice, but until he's out there facing major league or even minor league hitting in spring training, I grow more and more skeptical on Nunez's availability to make this team, with him potentially starting the year on the injured list. And if he starts the year on the injured list, you start to look at the roster and you start to look at guys who are out of options, like Danny Young, who's out of options. He has a leg up on making this team. We did see that Sean Reed-Foley, who also didn't have options, accepted becoming a minor leaguer or accepted being, I forget the exact phrasing of it. Basically, they put him on waivers. Nobody claimed him. They reassigned him to minor league camp, and he's good to go. But does this open up an opportunity for Huascar Brazaban, who does have an option left and has looked relatively good in spring training, to make this team? Here's the way I look at the bullpen right now, 2 weeks away from the start of the season. Edwin Diaz, good. AJ Minter, trending good. Ryan Stanek, good. Jose Buto, good. Reed Garrett, good. That gets you to 5. Assuming out of the gate the Mets are going to go with a 5-man rotation, it still means that you're keeping Senga, you're keeping Peterson, you're keeping Holmes, Canning, and Blackburn. But it allows you to have McGill start the year in AAA, so you could have 8 relievers. So that opens up 3 bullpen spots where Danny Young is involved, where Dednell Nunez can hopefully be healthy. But the other guy who I think makes this team as of right now is Max Kranick. Max Kranick's got the leg up to make this team with the way he's thrown the baseball here in spring training. He has looked good. He's a multi-inning guy, which certainly helps. So I guess if I'm kind of looking at the lay of the land right now on who makes the team and who doesn't make the team, and Kranick does have options left. So the Mets have the ability to just send him down. That's why, like, Danny Young feels like, I don't want to say a lock because that's too strong. I don't think Danny Young's that good personally, but he doesn't have any options left. And so naturally, you're going to want to keep guys on your roster. But if Dednell Nunez starts the year on the IL, I think it certainly opens up the opportunity for Max Kranick to make this team. And I would certainly lean that way. So keep an eye on Nunez over the next couple of days. Hopefully he gets into a game, and that makes things, kind of better for this bullpen. Now, let me get back to Alvarez for a second. I made a list, very short list. It's not a great list. You're not going to love the list of guys on other teams, catchers on other teams, that are not even on a team's 40-man roster. The non-roster invitees on other teams that catch, that have major league experience, that very well will be released in the next 2 weeks, and the Mets could simply pick up and say, hey, that's a better option as backup catcher, more so than Jackson Reitz, more so than Hayden Senger. And I'm not suggesting all these guys are, but my eyes are wide open. I think the Mets' eyes are wide open. Right now, when you look at Reitz and you look at Senger and you look at Williams and you say, okay, who has the leg up in terms of the internal options? I'm going to say Jackson Reitz because he has major league experience. I think he's a good defensive catcher. I don't even know for sure because I haven't watched him enough. So I think he has the leg up, but I think David Stearns, and he admitted this as much, is going to look at the outside world and see what's out there. So I made a list of 5 non-roster invitees on other teams, which means they're certainly on the outside looking in terms of making a roster, all with major league experience that I think you've mostly heard of. They're not stars. They're just guys you've heard of. So here we go. Are you ready? Number 1, Jorge Alfaro. Remember Jorge Alfaro, catcher, right-hand hitter? He's got the big, the hair. He's currently in camp with the Milwaukee Brewers. The problem is, and you're going to notice a trend with a lot of the guys I'm talking about, and I don't think offense is the number one priority here. I think defense is. But Jorge Alfaro has not been in the major leagues since 2023. And in 2023, he split time between Colorado and Boston. He had a negative WAR, and he hit 146. Early in his career with Miami and Philadelphia, he had a little bit of pop. He was a relatively good prospect. Was he in the Real Muto trade? Part of me thinks he was, and that's how he got from Philadelphia to Miami. And so he's kind of bounced around. He's a veteran. He's 32 years old, but certainly when you talk about a guy with major league experience who could give you some decent at-bats for a small period of time, Alfaro right now is in Milwaukee camp. I don't think he makes the team. That is an option. That's number 1. Option number 2, you are more familiar with his brother because his brother is on the Philadelphia Phillies, and we beat him in the playoffs last year, and that is Austin Nola. Austin Nola's bounced around, last with the San Diego Padres back in 2023, and the problem is very similar to Alfaro. Early in his career, he had some decent offensive years with Seattle and San Diego, but his last go-around back with the Padres, he hit 146 with a 452 OPS in 52 games back in 2023. He's now 35 years old, but again, a guy with major league experience. The third guy is a world champion. Do you guys remember Martin Maldonado, the former Houston Astro? Well, Martin Maldonado is now 38 years old, so he's getting up there in age. Formerly with the Houston Astros, as you remember, with the Cubs, with the Brewers. Last year, he was briefly with the White Sox. And some of the numbers he put up is some of the worst offensive numbers, honestly, I've ever seen from a non-pitcher. He hit 119 with a 403 OPS in 147 plate appearances. He was never a hitter, even in his time in Houston, but he was a plus defender. And so at 38 years old as a plus defender, you know, could he help this relatively young staff, or I should say inexperienced staff, guy like Clay Holmes converting into the rotation? Maybe. That's a guy to keep an eye on. But again, look, these numbers are all going to make you throw up. The other guy, another veteran who's been around, is Christian Bethancourt, who is now in camp with the Toronto Blue Jays. Bethancourt is 33 years old, another guy with plenty of major league experience. Last year, very briefly, he was with the Cubs and the Marlins. He did not hit with Miami. With Chicago, he actually hit 280 with an 800 OPS. But overall, again, not giving you much offense. I think a pretty good defender as well. Unfortunately, these are the options you're talking about when we mentioned non-roster invitees. The other guy we talked about last time was Tomas Nido. One of the big turnoffs to Tomas Nido, and I had this sent to me by numerous people, is that, and I think I brought this up on the Rico, I just forget about it, you know, the fact that Tomas Nido, when he was here last year, if you listen to the breakdown of records when each guy was catching, when Francisco Alvarez, and this is all the way back in June, okay? So this was a stat in the middle of June as the Mets were figuring out the catching situation. and Luis Torrens had just come to the team. The Mets were 12-6 when Alvarez caught, 4-2 when Torrens caught, 9-12 when Narvaez caught, and 7-18 when Nido caught. Now, very interesting information. I thank Pete for sending this. Not Pete Hoffman, but Pete, a guy who I used to play baseball with, and he's a nice guy and he's a big Met fan. I wouldn't get nuts about that, honestly. Like in the middle of June, us looking at the records with each individual catcher, we know the deal with Nido. He's a good defender, a little overrated, but good defender. He has experience with some of the guys on this staff. And again, think about what we're talking about. We're talking about a backup catcher. We're not even talking about the starting catcher. I'm not getting nuts saying they got to go get a starting catcher and Torrens should be the backup. Look, Luis Torrens is a perfect backup. Unfortunately, he's being asked to start right now because Alvarez is hurt. But I don't think Nido is a horrible option. The last guy I want to bring up is Alex Jackson. He's actually in camp with the New York Yankees. He's not on a non-roster situation, but he has no options left. And obviously, I keep a close eye on the Yankees with them being a local team. I don't think he's making the team. They are much higher on J.C. Escara, who has gotten a lot more playing time. They also have the option of Ben Rice being their backup catcher because Ben Rice can catch. So I just don't think Alex Jackson makes the team. Alex Jackson's another guy who cannot hit at all, but is known as a tremendous defender, especially as a pitch framer. And to me, that's what I'm looking for. So I know we're going to get jokes made about us, but I'm going to make you a prediction. I think Alex Jackson is the backup catcher for the Mets on opening day. And so, yes, the Mets' two catchers will be quote-unquote Yankee castoffs. That is my prediction. But I don't think Jackson's a bad option. He was traded from Tampa to Cincy, I think. He ended up with Cincy, then was sent by Cincy to the Yankees, and here he is trying to make the Yankees, which I don't think he will, based on the fact that it really does seem like they like Escara and they like Ben Rice more. He's a left-hand hitter, if that matters. So those are your outside options. It's not appealing. I get it's boring. I apologize if the last 7 minutes bored you. But, hey, listen, it's the Rico Brogna. I'm going through the backup catchers. They're not even backup catchers. They're not even third-string catchers. They're just catchers who are hanging out in different spring training sites.
They are really good defenders. I mean, basically, none of these guys are offense. Like, you're not looking for one person that's like, hey, you know what? He could actually add to this lineup. That's not happening.
Well, do you think that is something you're going to get from not just a backup catcher, but catchers in general? I mean, Pete Hoffman is the guy. No. Pete Hoffman is the guy who in fantasy has sometimes left the catcher slot empty because he gets no offense from the position.
It's a true story.
So then you can't tell me, like, how come you're not looking for offense? Because there is no offense.
Well, if you don't have a top 10 catcher that gives offense, you're basically going up there with a pitcher spot. I mean, that's basically what you're doing.
Well, that's why what I would do is I am treating Luis Torrens as the pitcher spot, and then late in the game, you pinch hit for him if need be, and that's it. By the way, one guy that they do have in camp, because you mentioned offense, and this is the guy more known for offense, is Chris Williams. Chris Williams is a right-handed catcher. He's only 28 years old. Here are some of his minor league numbers, and they're not amazing, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Like, he's an offensive player. Last year at AAA, he hit .221, but hit 17 home runs in 88 games and got on base a lot. Ended up with an 800 OPS, which is very good. The year before that, he hit .236, but hit 21 home runs and 75 RBIs in 95 games. That's huge power numbers. 847 OPS. In 2022, with multiple teams in the minor leagues, let me see where it was. It was in AAA and in AA. He hit a combined 28 home runs in 117 games, 246 average, 843 OPS. So if you're looking for offense, right, from the backup catcher spot, it's Chris Williams. Now, he doesn't have major league experience, and so far his numbers here in the spring, it's a limited sample size. I can't even get nuts about it. He's 3 for 14 with a home run. So there's really nothing to judge it off of. But Chris Williams is the guy I would look at if your preference is offense. And I would put him over any of the other guys we mentioned just based on his accomplishments at the minor leagues, where he hits home runs. I mean, that's a lot of pop that I just described. So if you want offense, I would suggest Chris Williams is the guy that should make the team.
Well, the one thing that shocks me more than anything else is there's one name you didn't mention.
Go ahead.
He's currently on the roster, or he's currently on the on a minor league team right now. It's Kevin Parada, and he, by the way, is older than Francisco Alvarez by a couple months. So it's not like he can't come up because of his age. He just is not performing.
He hasn't hit. You know, we mentioned him briefly on the last Rico as an option because he's a prospect. He's a former first-round pick, so you think about him. But I don't think he has shown any indication that he would be ready for an opportunity like this. And that's why I don't mention him, because I just don't think he's an option at all. Just to go real quick on what he's done. Last year at Double-A, he hit .214 with a .663 OPS, 13 home runs, 43 RBIs. And while it may not be the fairest thing to look at, his percentage of throwing out base runners sat at 23%. Now, the league average in the minor leagues is a lot lower than the major leagues. The league average in the minors is only 20%, so he's actually a little bit above the league average, but it's also nothing to write home about. So I don't think Kevin Parada is an option. I think he's got to go to the minor leagues and hit and continue to grow. I mean, we're close to calling him a bust. He was a first-round pick in 2022. Maybe you give him one more year. But, yeah, I don't think he's an option. I think the names Jackson Reitz, Chris Williams, if you want offense, I can see your eyes. You're more intrigued by Chris Williams just because he hits for some pop.
Listen, the dream was Francisco Alvarez in the lineup, and that added a little spice to it. I kind of am looking for something to turn me on when the catcher position joins gets into the batter's box.
All right, so there's a vote for Chris Williams. We'll see. We'll see if he gets more at-bats over the next couple of days and weeks, and we'll see how this backup catcher spot rolls on. Now, let me get to Francisco Lindor. Lindor did an interview on the midday show with Sal and BT. Good job by Hoff. Hoff booked it. So how about you, bro? Let's put the Hoff over.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good job. So I listened, and there's one thing he said where I'm like, ooh, very interesting. And it goes back to something we've talked a lot about here on the Rico, which is, will you play 162 games? Obviously, Francisco has played a lot since coming to the New York Mets. Last year, he had the back issue, which caused him to miss a little bit of time the final week and a half of the year. So you think about his age. You think about the options the Mets have, like a Luis Angel Acuna if he's up here. You think about the back, which has been barely talked about here in spring training, and you start to wonder, do you sit Lindor more? Now, every indication I've gotten from Carlos Mendoza is they're looking for someone who can just slide over and play shortstop in a blowout, but not a guy who necessarily has to play shortstop for a couple of days. Like, they could go into the 26-man roster situation with not having a backup shortstop, or at least a real backup shortstop, and if Lindor got hurt, they would call a guy up. The one thing that would change that is if Lindor doesn't play every day. So Sal asked him directly, hey, Francisco, you're in your 30s. You had a back issue last year. Any possibility that maybe you take a few more off days this season?
No, not at all. I take a lot of pride in posting up, and if I want to be fresh for October, lift more weights and eat better and sleep.
How about that answer? First of all, the immediate no to the idea of taking more off days, and then lift more weights. So Lindor is going to have to be dragged to the bench. Now, that's the manager's job. So Carlos Mendoza, and this is one of the reasons why, as much as we baseball geeks love the sport and say, oh, I can manage a team, we can't manage a team. It has nothing to do with double switches or batting orders or when to use your bullpen. It's looking into a man's eyes, which Carlos Mendoza needs to do, and look into Lindor's eyes and say, I can't play you today, even though you want to play, even though you want to post. So it's on Mendy to step in. I don't think he's going to do that this year. I think the answer by Lindor, and certainly what Mendy has said about the roster, has given you every indication that Francisco Lindor, as he said, is going to post. And unless there's an injury, he's playing every day. Another reason why they are not going to need a backup shortstop on this roster. We appreciate the interaction, and I can promise you on the next Rico Brogna, we are going to go through a lot of your emails and a lot of your thoughts and a lot of your questions. So you can email us anytime at thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com, as we creep a little bit closer to the start of the baseball season. Opening day 2025, just 2 weeks away.
And listen, I just want to throw in there too, for anybody who participated in that survey that we had, thank you very much. For anybody who did not participate in the survey, you can now buy shirts. There's a link on this on the bottom of the YouTube page, and this is the description. There's a link there. You can buy the shirts. I'm going to put it in the actual podcast as well, a place you can go and purchase shirts. The Rico Established 22. Get yours, blue, orange, whatever you want, man. Go get it.
I am so curious to see which outsells which, the blue or the orange. Like, which is going to be the hotter, the Rico t-shirt, blue or orange? You got a prediction on that, Hoff?
I'm a blue guy, but I see like the 7 line. A lot of people wear orange all day. A lot of their shirts are bright orange. So
no,
and it looks good. It looks good.
It does look good. The shirts look very good. So you can purchase it at the link that is on the wherever you download the podcast or on the YouTube page. And, of course, download, subscribe to Rico Brogna. We try to give you as many Ricos as we humanly can. I like to say we guarantee you 2 a week, sometime on Wednesday, sometime on Sunday. But as you've seen throughout the offseason, we've lapped that. We certainly do a lot more than 2 a week. And as we get closer to opening day, the pace will continue. Thank you very much for listening, downloading, hanging out, and subscribing to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.